Hey guys, Kevin Cleary with a knife video. Today I've got a blade that I've been really interested in for some time. In fact, since it was introduced, I've been following this knife. I hadn't had a chance to get one in hand, so I'm really fortunate to be able to check this out. This is the SDC, or Slim Daily Carry, from Liong Mah Design. Now, if you're not familiar, Liong Mah Design is sort of a partnership between Liong Mah and Reate knives. So these knives are all designed by Liong Mah and manufactured by Reate Knives out of China. Really well done. I've had my hands on a couple of them, and if you go ahead and do a little bit of research, you'll find there's a number of models. I think the most recent one is the Warrior 2. I could be a little behind the 8 ball there, but consistently good designs, consistently well made, and very impressive. So gotta say, I'm definitely a fan of Liong Mah Designs in general, just as a company. And this knife in particular is especially cool, and it's one that I've been following because of the fact that it does a couple of things differently, okay? It's got a very small flipper tab here, and that small flipper tab totally vanishes into the handle. The other cool thing about this knife is, you guys know I like choils. Well, this doesn't have a choil, but it kind of solves the choil problem in a different way and gives you sort of a flat jimped area on the top and bottom of the blade, so you can choke up and get some good control for those finer tasks. Both of those features are features that I think are really interesting and a little bit innovative, actually. You know, on whether it be this knife or on another knife, I can say I'm a huge fan of those features and of the ergonomics and utility of this knife, where you have the ability to kind of get up on the knife like that. So really well done. And because of those things, I've been really interested in this knife. Now, this is not my own. It was sent to me for review by a friend, and so I was really excited to be able to get a hold of this and check it out, because, as I say, this is a knife that I've sort of been looking at and reading about and watching reviews of, and I've been pretty closely following it. So to have one in hand is kind of a treat. Now, let's give you the size and weight, and then we'll go over and take a closer look at this knife on the tabletop. So overall, the size on this is 8 3/8 inches. The blade length is almost 3 3/4, so it's more like 11/16 really. And the handle length is almost 4 3/4. Again, more like 4 3/16, or 4 11/16. But really nice size, sort of in that middle ground. It's a little bigger than, you know, it's nice to have something just a little more than the typical 3.5 inch blade, but the overall package is still nicely sized for everyday carry. The weight on this is 5.4 ounces, which is a little chunky, but not that bad. The blade is pretty thick stock, and there's actually not, the grinding here, the way it's done, is not removing a whole ton of material. Okay, so a lot of that weight, it can be attributed to the blade and, of course, the full backspacer rather than a standoff construction. But in pocket, this carries really nicely. And so does the size and weight live up to the name of the knife? I think absolutely it does. Very nicely done. Now, I will have some comparable options. I've got a couple of higher end, you know, knives that I think, if you're interested in this, you'll also be interested in, and that will be coming up sort of near the end of the video before we give our sort of final analysis. So let's go ahead and switch over to the tabletop view and go over some of the details on this knife. Okay guys, so here we are nice and close to the SDC here, the Liong Mah Design Slim Daily Carry. Let's go ahead and start off with the blade the way that we normally do. So we've got a nice draw point blade there, S35 VN steel. You can see satin on the flats and a stonewash finish on the bevels, which is really nice because it just allows you to use this blade a little more comfortably without having to worry too much about getting any scratches or marks on it. You know, the stonewash is going to hide that kind of stuff pretty nicely. It's fairly thick blade stock, and it's a fairly low grind. So I will say right off the bat that this is not the best slicer out there. The edge geometry is fine. It's just, it you know, thickens up quite quickly. Okay, and you guys know I've talked about this before, but there's this balance to be struck between a knife that slices and a blade that's really tough. Now, I feel like the name of the knife, SD Slim Daily Carry, implies that it's meant to be an EDC knife, and therefore my thinking would have been that cutting power would have been preferred over strength. However, this is a blade that's almost a tactical or hard use blade attached to an EDC knife. Okay. Don't want to be too negative about it because the edge geometry is acceptable. It does slice fairly well. Just wish it were ground differently. In fact, I think this knife would be, or I think this blade would be nearly perfect if instead of this very low grind like you see here, you know, it was ground right up to the top, and you could still have the swedge or even forget the swedge altogether. I feel like that would make it just a little more versatile and more suited to its intended design, which is supposed to be EDC. All right, now aside from that, I do think the blade is really attractive, and if I set the knife down, there you go, I think it kind of ties together well. All right, everything does look really sharp here, and no complaints about sort of the aesthetics of it. It's just more from a design standpoint, from a user standpoint, I'd like to see this knife be a little more oriented towards slicing tasks rather than I don't know, being as robust as it is. All right, so that's the blade. Of course, S35BN, I should make note that of course it's a very, very good steel, right? You're gonna get a good edge retention, you're gonna get good corrosion resistance, good toughness, reliability, you know, all the things that we like to see in a higher end knife steel. Now, let's move along and take a look at the lockup and deployment on this. First notice, I know we're not really talking about the handle yet, but you do have these very attractive pivot collars and Torx bit construction, which is nice. Again, very, very smooth. Now guys, this is a knife built by Reate Knives, and you know, essentially you're getting what you would expect to get from them. They have a reputation for extremely well made, very, very smooth knives, and this is no exception, okay? Now, there are a couple things I want to talk about when it comes to lockup and deployment, and that is the very, very cool, although a little harsh, very small flipper tab. Notice how little that is. Like, it's just barely there. It does flip well, but because of that small size and it's a little sharp on the corner, this is one that will wear your fingers out. And you know, I have a lot of knives and I flip a lot of knives like over and over again. So I've got pretty well calloused fingers, and this one does get a little painful. Now, if you're carrying this every day, and you're not like me, holding it and flipping it over and over again, it's probably not that much of an issue. Okay, the other cool thing though about that very small flipper, okay, is when the knife is deployed, there's no big tab sticking out here, okay? It just becomes sort of part of the handle design, which I will say I really do like, okay? And so in that respect, I kind of got to say I like that change, and I certainly favor a flipper of this size over, say, I don't know, if you think of an XM18, for example, with the great big flipper out the back. I'm not really crazy about that. I don't dislike XM18s, I actually really like them, but that one feature is something that I can live without. I like a smaller flipper when I can get it. Okay, so the action on this is very, very nice. The detent is pretty well dialed in, and that's typical from Reate knives. I've never, maybe you have, but I've never had a Reate knife that I've either owned or tried that didn't flip pretty nicely and didn't have the detent pretty well right where you'd want it. I've also never flipped one or used one that wasn't really nice and smooth, okay? So this is certainly a very smooth knife. Now, I will say it's not the fastest of all flippers that I've ever tried. It's fast enough, as you can see, but there's a lot of weight here. So once, you know, you've kind of got some inertia to overcome to get that blade moving. Now, once it gets moving, yeah, it moves pretty quickly. Before we move on, I should point out that you've got that very well done stainless steel lock bar insert. I do like the way these are done where it's almost invisible, right? Like you really, there you go. You can see it in there, but you really kind of have to look for it. So it's not something that stands out as part of the design, and probably a person who was not a knife person wouldn't even realize that they had put a stainless steel insert there, and it does extend back behind the frame to serve as an over travel stop as well. Okay, so that part, in terms of the performance of the lock, everything is very well done, okay? The only complaint that I can really offer here, and it's sort of part of the design maybe, is that this is quite sharp, and it will wear out your fingers if you flip this knife a lot. So moving on to the handle itself, let's get you some nice close-up views here. You can see very nice milling, really nice geared backspacer. You've got this very nice section here that does add a lot of tactile grip to the knife, plus the jimping on both the non-choil, it's almost like a finger rest rather than a choil, and the very slight ramp is good functional jimping. If you take a close look inside, yeah, you can see it there. You can see that this knife has been milled out to save some weight. Okay, it's still a pretty hefty knife, but I do appreciate even the effort. You know, you think it would be even heavier if they hadn't done that. So good on Reate and Liong Mah for doing the extra machining work to lighten up this knife a little bit. I definitely appreciate that. Excuse me. Lanyard hole there at the back is acceptable. I'm not a big lanyard guy, and so if it wasn't there at all, or if it was incorporated into the backspacer, I would probably like that a little bit more. But in this case, it doesn't detract, I don't think, from the design. Now let me speak to the pocket clip being where it is. A number of people have commented on a couple of these knives where the pocket clip is up here near the top of the knife, and they say, you know, it looks out of place or it looks weird. One, I don't find this one looks that out of place. On the Remedy, yeah, it did look maybe a little more out of place. However, there's a very particular reason for this, and that is this crease in your hand right here. Okay, when you have this knife in hand, the pocket clip drops right into that crease that I was just pointing to, right there, and it just, you can't even feel it. It's really well placed for ergonomics, okay? And to me, you know, that's important. You know, yeah, could you move it to make the knife look better? Yeah, but do you really want the knife to look better or feel better? And to me, I think if you're going to have a knife that you're going to use and not just sit on a shelf, you want it to be comfortable in hand. And certainly this one is very comfortable in hand. In terms of just the overall feel of it, it is a very comfortable knife. You know, it locks into your hand well. The jimping and the texturing is just the right amount in just the right places, okay? There is, from time to time, now it doesn't always happen, and so I'm a little hesitant to even talk about it, but I will because I think it's fair. There's this cutout here for the lock bar, and when the knife is closed, it looks really cool the way the lock bar kind of is folded under that part of the frame. However, when you open the knife and the lock bar's over here, it creates right at the tip of my finger there, you see that little sharp spot. Now, I would say 98% of the time when you're using this knife, you don't even notice it. The one time that you, the 0.1% of the time or whatever that you turn your hand kind of a certain way, how do I have to hold it? If I hold it just right, I will say I can feel that sharp corner, and I have noticed it a couple of times using the knife, although not regularly. So I'm not suggesting that it's horrible, but it would be nice to see that just smoothed off a little bit because it can get a little sharp for certain cutting tasks. All right, so that's the handle. Very well done, really nice looking handle. I can't really, you know, essentially the measure to me of a good handle is when I grab the knife, is it comfortable in hand, and does it feel like I'm going to drop it? Is it too slick to use? And the answer to all those questions is no. Everything is really good. It's comfortable, it's grippy. No question that this handle to me is very well pulled off, and I especially appreciate the way that they've allowed for you to choke up, or Liong Mah has designed this to allow for you to choke up on the knife and do some detailed work with that finger rest at the top and the ramp at the bottom. That I really gotta say that I like. Okay, let's do some comparisons now. The first, and I'd say most obvious comparison, would be the Torrent from Reate knives. There are some other comparisons that we can make, especially I don't have a bunch of Liong Mah Design knives, but the Torrent is a great knife. A little more detail on the Torrent, and the action is just a little bit nicer, but you're also looking at about, you know, $80 more or something like that. So if you like the SDC, but want something just a little more refined with some a little more interest, as far as I'm concerned, you may want to look toward the Torrent. There are some other knives as well, though. If you're interested in this and you go, yeah, but 350 bucks is a lot, you may think about the ZT-0801. Fairly similar size. I will say I like the ergonomics on the SDC a little better than I like the ergonomics on this. However, the price point difference is rather significant, okay? Now this one, of course, is the limited edition, but I'm, you know, it's kind of standing in for the standard 801, and I think the 801 is a good example of a well-made titanium frame lock. Another knife that you may want to know about, if you have some interest in this, is this knife from Real Steel Knives, the S571 Pro. Again, great knife, slightly. Now, here's one thing that I would say. I wish this knife, don't change hardly anything, but make the blade grind more like this. Okay, so change this blade with that blade, and I think this knife would be in a different class. I think that would really be an upgrade to the design of the knife. All right, so that's the Real Steel S571. And I'm kind of going all over the place when it comes to price point here. Some of these are a little less, some of them are a little more. A knife like this from We Knives. There are a number of We Knives I guess you could compare here, but this is a knife that costs about the same amount. It is a little bit, well, not a little bit, it's a fair bit bigger. A little more detail happening here. If you're really into colors and stuff like that, you might be drawn to some of the We Knives over some of the Reate knives, although in terms of quality and in terms of just sort of feel in hand, I gotta say the Reate knives do a really, really good job. One more ZT. I will say, whenever I'm looking at a knife like this, it's hard not to compare to some zero tolerance knives, because, you know, zero tolerance knives are often using comparable materials and coming in at a considerably lower price point. No, yeah, I know there's attention to detail here, and there's some things you're not going to see on a ZT that you're going to see on something like this or the other Reate that I've showed you. Yeah, 0452, fantastic action, great knife, and of course, you know, a good $100, a little more than $100 cheaper. One more knife that I will say captures what this knife is shooting at, okay? This knife is called the Slim Daily Carry. This knife is a slim daily carry, okay? This knife is very, very slim, extremely comfortable, very well built, and I'd say this knife probably pulls off a little better. This is the Southern Talc, by the way, but this knife pulls off a little better what this knife is named for, okay? This is truly a slim daily carry knife. Where you get a slim knife that's easy to carry, that's lightweight, but you don't have to sacrifice any sort of toughness or utility to get it. All right, so that's the last comparison that I've got for you. Let's give sort of some overall impressions on this knife. Overall, the fit and finish on this, the quality, the feel in hand is very, very good. This is a knife where when you get it in hand, you definitely say to yourself, this is a piece of precision cutlery, okay? Really, really well done. In terms of all the pieces functioning the way they're supposed to, right? Does the clip go in and out of pocket nicely? Does the lock up solid and reliably? Does it flip fast and does it flip smooth? The answer to all those questions is absolutely yes. Is it comfortable in hand? Very much so. Is the blade, you know, does it slice well? Not so well, but it definitely cuts well. Okay, you can add a little force to it, and the blade, the handle is ergonomic enough that, yeah, if you have to push a little harder to get this blade through some material, you've got the comfort to do that. All right, so overall, I think this is definitely a win. I think this is a well-made knife. I think it's comfortable. I think it's got some different features to it that make it stand out from the crowd, especially the way the flipper is designed and the different ergos on this handle, the way they've achieved the ability to, or the way Liong Mah has achieved the ability to choke up on this knife and get some fine detailed work done. I really appreciate. So yeah, great knife. Definitely a real treat to be able to experience this for a while. And thanks again to the friend who let me borrow it for review. We'll talk to you soon.